Them Alive by Nace. Read by Al Richardson. Chapter 10. Gaining power over as many mantises as his purpose required was less effort than Dyke had expected. Each morning he shot some of the beasts for the others to eat, thus maintaining his ability to bring down any who threatened him or refused to follow the motions he made to them. The words he gradually taught the chosen few, making them understand and obey orders. As the days passed, his leg healed, but it was slow and painful, causing him to limp. He dismissed the ache and the limp, however, assuring himself that his purpose left no time for self-pity. From the canyons on the island, he resurrected enough lumber and tin to put together a lean-to. And beneath it, he dug a cave using tools from the boat. He made a room for himself and another for Slayer. Little by little he dug out a third room, large enough to hold 20 of the beasts, the number he decided to use as his avenging army. He coaxed a score of the mantises into the cave room and secured them there, covering the dirt floor with scraps of tin to hold out others that might come snooping for food. Each day he shot plenty of mantises to feed his 21 selected beasts, letting the others on the isle fend for themselves. Slayer and the 20 rewarded him by making no attempt to attack him, by simply waiting for him to feed their cannibalistic appetites. During the remainder of each day, Dyke worked on his boat, repairing the damage that the tidal wave, and later Slayer, had caused. Enough was left to allow a semblance of order. At each end, fore and aft, he built mammoth cages from the scraps of iron that he salvaged, constructing each cage large enough to hold 10 of the beasts, and to make their escape impossible. When the cages were finished and the boat was in good condition, as Dyke seemed to be able to put it, he began to kill and haul aboard dozens of mantises to furnish food for the 21 he planned to take into the jungle. He was confident that there would be villagers enough for all to eat once he reached the dense growth on the land. Natives would be the beasts' best meals as they made their way toward Ibak. He promised himself aloud, "When we get to the mainland, I'll go down to a town and buy or steal a truck. I'll load it with my mantis avengers. I'll drive it to Ibak and find out where Pete Stewart is hiding. I'll turn my monsters loose upon him and his family if he has one. I'll watch my green insects eat him, and I'll shout my pleasure. Then I'll take whatever possessions he has and I'll bring them back to Malpelo. I'll make me a great house among the beasts, and I will be the only human being who will be safe on the island. Nobody, no lawman, no ancient enemy, not even any curious hound would dare approach my stronghold. The first ones to try it will be eaten by my beasts, and the rest will hear of the tortured deaths and will maintain their distance. When enough time has elapsed for Pete's death to be forgotten, I'll start hunting the other 3, Kane and Zeb and Ryan. I'll see them die the way Pete will have died. Then I'll go back to my island home and live in safety for the rest of my life. I'll fish for my food and lie in the sun for my enjoyment. I'll know peace and quiet at last. I will be avenged." 2 months passed. But at last the day came when Dyke readied his mantises for the trip inland. He taught Slayer to take dead beasts to the 20 in the cave, and those creatures had learned to await the big mantis's appearance, as they awaited Dyke himself. Many times Dyke told Slayer, "Dip your red head when you go into the room," and Slayer did, always receiving in return and moving back by the others. A difference, a respect. Using the bait of their own fellows' meat, Dyke coaxed the beasts aboard the boat, 5 at a time. He got them all into their cages with Slayer's help, and the red-headed monster, still commanding the obedience of the others, nudged them wherever Dyke motioned him to place them. The sea was calm as they set out for land. The calmest Dyke could remember seeing it. Bluish-white clouds hugged the horizon, whispering only a vast quiet upon the water. And as the boat left Malpelo, the island looked beautiful, overgrown with waving green that the naked eye could not recognise as living, death-dealing insects, but accepted as a crop of some kind, or perhaps an ocean growth of grass or seaweed that had been tossed up by the recent tidal wave. Eyeing it, Dyke said, "Maybe it'll look good to people when they're out in boats. Maybe it'll be attractive, intriguing. But if they step onto my land, they'll be food for the mantises. And that will fit my plan, because it will help to keep the beasts happy." He allowed all the beasts to eat their cannibalistic fill on the way to the shore, and he gave Slayer extra meals so the redhead would know no hunger when they started into the jungle. He moored the boat to a pier some distance from his own, and left the beasts there with their cages covered, distributing enough food to last them until his return. Or if it should not be sufficient for their appetites, he reasoned, they could make their meals on each other. He could manage his revenge with fewer than 21 beasts. 10, or even 5 of these great creatures would be enough to frighten and devour a village, and to overpower Pete Stewart. He locked Slayer in the galley again. But this time, all the food cabinets were covered with metal, and there was food enough for the insect if he curbed his greed a little. Dyke would not be gone more than 2 days at the most. He set out on foot to the nearest town to steal a truck. He might even buy one if the price was not out of his reach. He had money he'd brought from the ship, his small treasure that he always stored in his ammunition chest, and thus kept whole and dry. He had $150 in his pocket now, his savings of 11 years made by the selling of hides to nearby towns, by peddling his catches of fish and turtles. It served its purpose that Colombia was a strange mixture of civilization and ancient primitive culture. The untutored natives would feed his mantises between trips, in search of his old enemies, and the towns and cities would provide the materials he needed. In the first town he reached, a small settlement of less than 100 people, some white, he found his truck. It belonged to an old wino who was sobbing and grovelling in his need for liquor and no money to buy it. Since nobody in the village had need of a truck, he'd been unable to sell his vehicle. He could only sit and cry. He was a pitiful figure, in his long grey beard, his bare feet cut and bleeding, without his notice. Too many people were standing around for Dyke to steal the truck, so he said, "I want to buy your truck, old man. I'll give you $50 for it." The wino, who stared at him through bleary eyes, "Give me 75, boy." 60, and no more. I can buy trucks in any town for $60. He hoped the clouded mind of the old man would accept his lie. And the lush did. "Give me the money, boy. I'll drink it all up and then I'll die. I'll die happy if I've got a bottle with me. Dyke patted the old codger's bare shoulder. Sauce yourself to death if you want to. Forget whatever it is that you need to forget. He drove away in the truck. He'd studied the map of the country until he knew it by heart. He had no difficulty finding the road to Abac. Would he find Pete Stewart still alive, in the place where he said he planned to live? Between clenched teeth, Dyke muttered, "If he's not there, I'll find out where he is. I'll track him down no matter what I have to do, where I have to go. I'll see my beasts eat him and the other four, see their blood flow upon the ground, see their organs torn out, see their bones sucked for marrow. I'll see their heads cracked open and their brains devoured by my monsters. I'll watch it, and I'll feel like a glorified man. All man. If I never see another thing, if I go blind after I've seen what I've lived to see all these years." When he came to the outskirts of the mountain town of Abac, he parked the truck and walked into the settlement. He had put on an old felt hat when he left the boat, and now he pulled it low over his face. If Pete were in town somewhere, Dyke didn't want to be spotted until the time came for slaughter. He wore a ragged shirt, a concession to the covering of his scarred shoulders. To himself, he looked like any of the white wanderers who make their way through this country. He dared not ask if or where Pete lived. He would have to look himself, which he did. He said, "It shouldn't be hard to locate that stabbing rat. These Colombian towns have a lot of natives and sometimes a lot of whites. But there aren't too many blacks from the United States. Fact is, there aren't usually any at all. Especially none who speak good English and wear American clothes. And God, old Pete, he'll be dressed fit to die." So Dyke stole along the streets, speaking to no one, but missing no man's face as he went. Yet he could not turn up anybody resembling Pete. Though he spent most of the day searching, peering into every store and every house along his way. Would Pete be established in a mansion somewhere outside the city, perhaps overlooking it in the mountains? Pursuing the same reasoning, would he be ensconced in the misty blue mountains themselves? Abac sat in a valley among peaks, and the peaks appeared to extend on and on, one ridge of mountains following another as far as Dyke could see with his binoculars. Every craggy height could conceal a rich man's home, a wealthy son of a bitch who'd left a buddy to die upon a Texas ranch. Dyke drove the truck up the paved mountain road. He saw it was well kept, which must mean that it led to somebody's place of easy living. He said the well-heeled families usually live away from the town's ordinary people down here, and Pete would be the kind to pose as a rich guy, a millionaire, somebody too good to associate with the common men. Besides, he could hide out better up here, in case extradition came hunting him for the robbery and murder of Old Shield. Dyke found many fabulous homes in the vast area of the Colombian mountains, their architecture imposing, their lawns velvet, their wealth flaunted. At first, he found a white family, so white that none of them, not even the father, sported a suntan. Their accent was British. That ruled them out. It was the same way for miles. All the families, either white or native. None of them black. But behind the highest peak of all, Dyke left his truck and moved stealthily towards a magnificent white stone house. around which 4 black children played tag. And in the blue and pink swimming pool, in which flowers floated, a man and a woman sat dabbling their toes into the water. A native girl was serving them drinks and sandwiches and little cakes, balancing her silver tray high in one hand as she moved back and forth between them. Dyke lay concealed in the jungle growth outside the high wire fence, seeing, but unable to be seen. He whispered soundlessly, "That's got to be Pete, damn his hide. He'd have a house like this and a wife and servants to wait on his ego. He'd have 4 kids, and maybe some inside the house, because he'd want to feed his self-esteem by replacing himself as many times as he could. Why doesn't he turn around so I can get a good look at his face?" At that moment, the light-complexioned black man stood up, stretched, and turned half around, showing Dyke his profile. He was older than Dyke remembered, but all people would age in 11 years. He looked relaxed, secure, happy, unafraid of anything or anyone. The old Pete had never worn that look. But there was no doubt he was Pete. Dyke slipped back through the trees and tall grass back down the road to his truck. He got into it, drove back to town, down the mountain road, back through it back across the country, where he'd left his mantises. Would they have ripped the boat apart in their craving for food or their fury at being penned up? Would they have freed themselves and rushed ashore, dashing into the jungle, scattered in all directions to do their killing and eating without Dyke's commands? No. When he reached the beach, he was pleased to find that the boat had rocked upon the water exactly as it did when he left. It appeared not to have been disturbed in any way, and none of the beasts were in sight. Dyke took off his shirt and covered his body with a fresh supply of the protective potion. Then he went to look in the cages. In the first one, there were 5 creatures alive and fat and active. They'd eaten the other 5, and the remains of the dead insects littered the bottom of the cage. In the second cage, there were 4 living beasts. Dyke shoved a new supply of food, most of the remainder of the beasts he'd shot on the island, into the cages. The mantises hopped on the food at once, started tearing the bellies to bits, emptying them of their contents, chewing them to crumbs with great relish. Dyke dragged the last 2 carcasses down the stairs to the galley. He had no wish to encounter a hungry slayer without a hand to alleviate Slayer's fast. He opened the door and met the eyes of the great red-headed mantis as he was waking from a nap on the rug that Dyke owned. The man moved into the room and touched the beast, saying, "I'm back, friend, and I've brought you food. Soon there will be more, and it will be better. You and the others will eat a village or 2 for practice as we make our trip. It will be practice for the torture and devouring and killing of the men I hate." Slayer was eyeing him as if he understood. Dyke went on, "God, I can hardly wait to see how scared he'll be when he recognises me, and he sees the monsters I'll have with me. I can already picture the way you'll tear him open and spill his blood for me to see, friend. I may help you lick it up while he's still alive, so he can see me strengthening my life with the weakening and loss of his. Come, Slayer, get up and eat your fill of these beasts' stomachs." The mantis, bright, bulging eyes met his directly, and Dyke felt the insect's reply as clearly as if the mantis had spoken. "Meat! I want meat! Live meat! Give me the kind of meat you gave me on the island and in the jungle." "You mean people meat?" Yes, the thief in your cabin, the villagers on the island. Meat live and sweet. I will get you some people meat soon, friend, but this is all I have for now. As if the conversation had been real and understood, which Dyke believed it was, the monster clawed one of the mantis' belly open and scooped out the inside, filling his maw with the whole of it, chewing the mouthful to bits. Then he ripped the second belly apart and ate it the same way. When he'd finished, Dyke told him, I'm going to make you my assistant, friend, Slayer. We're going to herd the 9 mantises into my truck for the trip. Come on, we'll go upstairs. When they were topside, Dyke took up the poles he'd set before he left the boat. There were fish on all of them. He fed part of the food to Slayer and put the rest on a long pole to carry ahead of the other mantises. They went to the first cage and opened the door. Dyke moved off the boat and towards the truck, carrying the fish and motioning the insects to follow, which they did. Slayer came behind them, prodding them along if they lagged, grabbing back one that attempted to rise on his wings and be gone. Dyke said, Good boy, Slayer. You do understand my orders, don't you? And you will lead the mantises in my avenging destruction. The people meat you will eat at Pete Stewart's house will be the sweetest you've ever tasted. And the blood, that will be the reddest, the fastest flowing, the best of all your blood drinks. They put the first group of insects into the truck bed and then brought the second cage of beasts. When the 9 were stowed in their assigned place, Dyke pulled a big net tightly over them. He motioned to Slayer to sit on the seat beside him, and the red-headed insect flew there and settled down for the ride. Dyke remembered seeing a village not too far away as he drove to Ibak for the first time. It was secluded like most of the native settlements, and the beasts could eat every soul in it, as they'd helped to devour Keiko's people. If any came searching for them, they would attribute the bones and skulls to wild animals that had grown bold and left their jungle lairs to make their meal upon the villagers. Wouldn't they? But if they did not, it would be no matter. Nothing could be tied to the lonely island recluse. And if it could, the mantises, not Dyke, would be blamed. In any case, he would come out whole and free of accusation. Within the hour, Dyke parked the truck a few yards from the village he sought. There were at least 10 men and their women, plus 24 children in the settlement. They would furnish splendid eating for the beasts. 2 large people bodies, and at least 2 small ones for each mantis. They could eat their fill for the first time since they left Malpelo. As Slayer had indicated, people meat was their best-loved meal. Dyke motioned Slayer off the truck and waved towards the 9 mantises in the back. Bring them down, friend. We will give them people to eat, and you too. All of you will find real food in this village, friend. Together the man and the redhead coaxed and nudged the 9 creatures from the truck bed. Dyke led the way into the village. The 9 mantises waddled behind him, and Slayer came lumbering after them. 6 men sat about a small fire cooking something. Other men stood not far from them, and women talked together while children played about them. As Dyke and his beasts broke into the midst of the native gathering, he called, "Here is your meal, my mantis friends. Help yourself to as much human meat as you can hold." The insects fell upon the unsuspecting villagers, each beast seizing 1 person, sometimes 2. The people stood aghast as the first beast knocked down 2 men and stood upon their bodies, a foot upon each male, its sharp claws slicing into the flesh, stripping off the scanty clothes, pulling an arm from its socket and devouring the flesh from it. 2 other men rushed forward as if to do battle with the great beasts, but each of them was snagged by a mantis that bore him to the ground and began to carve him into a delicious meal. In less than a minute, all the insects were eating. The sound of their happy hissing was a song in the dense jungle, echoing from tree to tree, from stream to stream, and the villagers who had not been seized in the first onslaught were huddled together in front of one of the shelters that served as homes to such natives. One half-grown boy tried to escape into the forest, but Slayer left a mutilated body to pursue the young male and chase him back to share the fate of the other villagers. Dyke glimpsed a woman running, apparently unseen by the beasts. He shot her down and dragged her into the centre of the community feast. He wanted no survivor to tell other people or authorities of the great green things who had been led into the village to dine upon the people there. With each insect trying to eat 2 humans at once, none was able to catch all the blood that ran from the bodies. Dyke watched the crimson tide grow until it made a river towards the sea, a beautiful course of scarlet that moved past Dyke, covered the toes of his heavy boots, grew deeper and deeper as more and more blood surged from the slashed bodies. Dyke felt elation filling him as he moved his feet, wading in the blood, glorying in it, loving it. He said aloud, "God, this is what I live for. The sight of humans being bled, being eaten, being torn to bits. I'm young and whole when I watch sights like this. I'm as good as any man alive. Eat on, my mantis friends. Eat until there is no more life here but you and me." Slayer was at his best and most vicious, Dyke noted. He was choosing women and children exclusively, seeming to know that he would find their meat more tender than that of the men. While Dyke kept his gun trained on people not yet claimed by the insects, Slayer crouched beside his master, eating babies and children almost whole, not bothering to tear them to bits, and finding his ultimate joy in the women he stripped and slit and ate. Terrified screams ran through the village now, shrieks that must surely carry for miles. Native men were struggling as they bellowed their pain, as their women and children sobbed and moaned. Dyke heard them cursing him, but he pretended not to understand their words. He was lost in the beauty of the open bodies, the flowing blood, the cracked skulls. The breasts were always Slayer's first bite of a woman, apparently his most exciting delicacy. As Dyke watched the red-headed beast sliced off a breast and held it up for a breath, then stuffed it into his great gullet, chewing it with obvious pleasure. Then he slashed off the other breast and devoured it just as eagerly, blood streaming from the female now, and Slayer drank it from the holes where the breasts had been. Then the beast sat back on his haunches, looking up and down the figure, clawing at the soft skin and leaving new blood marks with every slash, seeming to be in need of something he could not find. He looked up at Dyke, and the man caught the beast's plea. "The soft round parts. Where are there more of them?" Dyke told him, "They are on other women, friend. Catch another female and strip off her breasts. Let the other mantises have the rest of the woman. You take the breasts." He motioned towards the women who had not yet been attacked. Immediately, they were taken by Slayer. One by one, he threw women to the ground and tore off their sweet-tasting breasts. After sucking a few mouthfuls of each female's blood, he tossed her aside and seized a new woman who could give him more soft, round parts. In only a few minutes, he cut off the breasts of every woman who was still untouched, or who had been claimed by another mantis, but had not yet had the twin pendants ripped off her body. Dyke laughed. God, you ought to be full of that woman meat, Slayer. You've had the meat of breasts and the blood of them, and the milk of them. You're a glutton for the best, my friend. But go on being one. I want you ready to tear the breasts and the face from all the parts of Pete's woman. And from his children too. I want you to get all the practice you can, so that your torture will be as vicious as it possibly can be when we reach the Stewart place above Ibak. Slayer did not raise his head to reply. Dyke understood that his chief killer was too occupied with his woman meat to make conversation. But he added, "We will attack Pete and his household in the early morning, I think. And we will slay every person there. God, if Pete Stewart gets away from me, I'll kill myself, and you too, my friend."